I want to present this lecture today that we call Materia Viva. And what is important for us to bring in this forum is not to bring you the final projects that we do in the office and how it's like the final process of them, but we want to share with you more what is the process and what are the ideas behind the projects. I do believe that it's much more relevant in the times we are living in, where you can find most of the work in the internet, so we will try to focus on that. We call this lecture, and maybe this idea has been in the office for almost a year, that is Materia Viva, and we like these two words because there's a playing with them. For example, when we talk about matter, what we refer, obviously in the first place, is the idea of materia that we use to build things, the matter of the solid world that we recognize, but also in Spanish, materia could be also understood like the subject of something, the subject of something that you want to study. But so also in the same sense, if we talk about materia, we also think about the elements or the drawings that we use to draw architecture or to work in architecture. So everything in the process that we work, it's materia. And we talk viva, it's because to think it about living matter, it's because we believe that everything, not just the solid matter like a brick or the drawing or even the subject that we are studying, everything is evolving, so everything is alive, so we want to recognize that. So previous to this image, we saw the first image that was taken above the Earth almost 80 years ago. 20 years later, we see this image about the planet Earth floating in the space. These are somehow relevant because we have some experience like that in the previous weeks with the Orion mission. And what we'd like to introduce the lecture with these images is because when these images were taken, something that was interesting is that they present somehow the Earth in a different way, but also represent so many things. And these images produce a huge change in human consciousness. For example, in architecture, people like Buckminster Fuller rethink the way we understand planet Earth, and that impulses a lot of architectural movements, followed by Norman Foster, Renzo Piano, all the high tech, and also all the environmentalists. And it's really interesting just in the way some things are presented and represented as information that can reshape the way we see the world and how we're living today. Today we cannot see our practice as architects without the component of environmental thinking. And we forgot that these images were taken, when they were taken, they produced that change in conscience. So because of that, I want to introduce with these images. Sorry, it's not working, the clicker. Thank you. And that is the recent one, photographs that the mission Artemis and the Orion capsule take from the far side of the moon, give us a lot of questions that we want to use like an introduction for this lecture. When we think about the planet and the world and the way we work as architects, we use different kinds of representation. And when we want to do a kind of a map or a cartography of something, nothing is neutral. Because in the process we are presenting things, we are editing the world as we've seen it. We are putting hierarchy in things that are important for us and things that we don't want to see, it's something that we hide. So what is important for us is that when we are doing representation, everything is intention, is not neutral. So for example, when we grab a piece of land to design a really small house in a really small town in the state of Oaxaca in Mexico, we like to see all the surrounding that is beside the house. And what we like to see here is to understand that that house has a huge more implications rather than just the ones that are in a precise plot. So we like to see the territory that is beneath, to understand how it is shaped, and also how these shapes somehow form a complete territory, and to understand and see what is happening in all these like intermediate spaces between nature and human activity. And other cases, for example, we can represent how a specific site is being polluted by a mining company, and how the water flows that are around this town are affected by an extracting process, that also that extracting process is linked to a lot of things that we do as architects, because copper is everywhere in our lives, and this is a mining where they extract copper. But also, for example, another parts of the territory that it's full of violence, full of a lot of injustices, that it's the Mexican-US border, that it's a really violent territory, a really complex one in terms of politics, and we like to do an approach and to represent that and see it in a kind of how to say it, maybe a more aesthetic, just piece of information to see, but also that the politics and everything that is happening in this frontier, in the north frontier of Mexico, it also affecting and it's also changing what is happening in the south border of Mexico. That it's again this view of the frontier with Guatemala and Belize. And what it's interesting for us is that in the way we take a look at them, something that what we want to frame is that these are places that are in conflict, and somehow what we want to see in these kind of graphics or territorial representations is to understand that there's a possibility in this kind of context that could work differently. And here the question is, what do we as architects can do to improve these kind of things, or if we have a saying in these kind of topics. So when they invite us to do the Mexican Pavilion for the Venice Biennale, something that we want to present is a territory, again, that is not neutral. It's a territory that has a lot of complexities, a lot of things happening inside it in terms of injustice, in terms of violence, but we want to look at it like a potential space where, again, we can think that something different could happen there. So starting from that, we get inspired by the representations of Alexander von Humboldt in the 1800s. And what we love of these drawings is that the work that he, as an environmentalist or researcher, expeditioner, what he does is also represent what he was saying about the planet. So I don't know if you know the drawings of von Humboldt, but there are amazing drawings. But something that was really interesting is that in their representations, he managed to show the interconnectedness that has happened with human lives, with different kinds of species, with territory, with weather. So he started representing a whole world filled with connections. That was something that really changed also in the way we see things. Alexander von Humboldt traveled to Mexico in the 1800s, and he drew a trip that goes from the east coast, from the Puerto de Veracruz, from the Gulf of Mexico, and cross all the territory through these mountains to the other coast, to the Pacific coast in the west of the country. And what he realized there is that the territory was completely rich in terms of biodiversity, in terms of water resources, in terms of also cultures. So based on his legacy, what we want to represent here is to understand this territory. So we start doing what do as architects do. When we get a plot, we do a model of the plot, we try to do a plan of it. So here what we do is to try to model the complete Mexican territory in the most detail as possible. So we do a 3D model of the territory based on GIS information. And from there, we do a lot of tests, and what we wanted to do is to CNC the territory in stone, to carve it in the stone, because what we want to see is how this territory could show us a new phase of possibilities of what we can do and what could happen in the territory. We were inspired by the muralist movement in Mexico. That was a movement in the early 60s, where a lot of social injustice and a lot of social causes were represented in these kind of murals. So we like this idea of the mural because also it's related to architecture, because we as architects work with walls, so we understand that working with a mural could also give us the idea of a space. So what we do is to translate that carving of the territory into these stones in the Mexican pavilion to show a country of the possibility of a territory completely, in the first phase, completely clean in some kind of a way, to understand that there's a different way to see it, and there are different ways possible as architects to do with the territory, that we can change that. But in the other phase, what we show, it's also that this territory, in the reality, in the actual data information, it's full of violence, it's full of injustices, a lot of catastrophes that are brought together by natural extreme weather. And at the end, the territory has a kind of a cancer if we represent it like that. But in somehow, what was important for us is that this is one phase, that is the reality. But that doesn't mean that the other phase, that is this phase of the territory that it's clean, doesn't exist. It's also a potential space. So this idea of the pavilion was translated in the topic that was called Echoes of a Land. And what we show also was a group of projects that were placed along the pavilion that want to be confronted with this idea of the territory. Not judging them, not saying that these are nice projects or incredible architectural pieces, but what we want to understand is to make people think that if these projects are really talking with this idea of the territory that we can think about or not. So that's what we present. And also in the pavilion, something that we try to model at the center is this path that Alexander von Humboldt do from one coast to another. So we do this cross-section of the territory in a huge stone model. And also in the back part of the mural, what we place is a drawing, that it's a handmade drawing of all the species that goes in this section from one side of the country to the other, in terms of trees, in terms of vegetation. So we do this section that it's a 6 meters long section. Every tree was drawn by hand, scanned, and then put it in the mural. And then we have the final result of the pavilion. Trying to do a jump. It's not working, or it's like a little bit slow, the clicker, sorry. Okay. Good. Leaving Venice behind and moving forward to another part of the planet and going back to Tenochtitlan, something that two cities are related in the way they were conceived at the beginning. 500 years ago, the city of Mexico was a complete city placed above the lakes, the same way that Venice was 500 years ago. And today, Venice is a city that stills in the lake, and Mexico City is a city that is far from this idea. And I like this comparison because, again, talking about the possibilities of what we can imagine, just in these 500 years, a territory could be completely reshaped in some kind of a way, in the case of Mexico City, or in the case of Venice, the territory could be exactly the same. So going back to Mexico City, and in a so dense and so crowded place like the downtown of the city, something that we think about a lot is how do we learn to relate to territory, because we understand that the colonial movement that colonized Mexico doesn't know a way to relate with water, so we dry the lakes, so they understand another kind of urbanism to develop the city, like the one they made. But also there was a different way they relate to the territory or to the natural environment. So not just from there, but also the city of Tenochtitlan already has that kind of idea of the courtyard as a way to relate to the territory. This kind of where you can do enclosures of small fragments of of nature, and from there relate with the natural environment. So in downtown, in the back of the cathedral, we find this plot. And something that is really interesting in this configuration of the downtown, it's the amount of patios that happen alongside the downtown. So this is a kind of null interpretation of the solid volumes, but in this next slide, what you see, it's the voids that the space, like in the downtown we have the amount of courtyards that are placed in the space. So in a regular building, just this one on the back of the cathedral, what you can see and what you can imagine inside those projects is a courtyard that is void, when you can have natural light, when you can have vegetation. So we found this old house from the 1800s that was completely in a really, really bad state. It was a part of the property of the church, of the Cathedral of the Mexico City. And we were commissioned to design a hotel in this space. So something that we wanted to do and to understand is, if we were starting from this idea of the courtyard, where normally these kind of typologies were constructed, what we wanted to do is to understand that the courtyard is, we could say, the highlight of what happens in this kind of houses. Because normally the interior spaces in colonial architecture is not so elaborate, but at the end the courtyards has a lot of integration, a lot of architectural elements that define the space. So what we try to do is to reproduce inside the bedrooms, inside the rooms of the hotel, this idea of the courtyard with the smaller elements that introduce access to the room. So what we want to define here is to understand that a courtyard is not just an element that organizes space, but it also could be an element to remember the things that we are interested in, that it's light, nature, water, ventilation, and how that could be the structure that articulates architecture in this specific hotel. So from there, we do a renovation of the main courtyards and the facades at the interior of the hotel. So you can say the comparison between the old building and the new building, where what we do, it's not much, it's just like refurbish what was already there, trying to renew the elements and just bringing them to our current period of time. But also, what we were trying to do here is to rethink what is the purpose of this kind of projects. What is the purpose to renew an old building and transform it into a hotel? And what can we say in this new time that we're living about the idea of hospitality or the idea of luxury? So something that we want to bring inside the rooms is this idea where luxury, it's everything about light, it's everything about natural ventilation, and that's how we want to sell this in this idea of the hotel. So we use this reference of Hans Meyer of the minimum space and try to reproduce that with natural materials that are really, really common in Mexico, with really cheap textiles, with really simple and classic furniture that we can add, and leave that the space and the light is everything in the room. This kind of idea was also aligned with the Shakers' idea, that is these religious movements from the US, that what they do is they have a really nice craftsmanship about wood. So what we like about that is this idea of how can furniture could be the ornament in a space, just the furniture, not additional ornaments, it's just the furniture, what it's dressed the space. So we work with La Metropolitana, that is a wood company, to help us to design these kind of wood elements to place in the space. And also to reconnect with this project some kind of memories, because this was originally the house of Manuel Álvarez Bravo, that is a very famous Mexican photographer. So we like to do this idea of this image that is one of his famous photographs, that it was taken in this house maybe 50 years before than when we remodeled this project. So it's again like this kind of connections. Following up with this idea of history and how can we relate with that. Sorry, but could we move forward? Like it's another one? Another one? Okay. For some reason it's not completely working. When we represent something, we as architects, we are, like I was saying, we are editing. We are trying to grab what we are seeing in front of us. We're trying to translate that depending on the way we are putting it into a paper, into a model, into whatever we do. So what we want to use this as a reference is what can we say or how can we relate to the memories of a neighborhood, for example, like Colonia Condesa, that is a 120 years old neighborhood, and what can we say in the constructions and the history that is placed inside this space. So for example, when we see this facade of an old building and we are commissioned to renew this kind of projects and transform it from a single house to a complex of four different houses, we want to think what is valuable about these spaces. And in the way we edit and the way we take the elements of these properties, the way also that we think or that we to put in front the things that are important for architecture or for ourselves or for the city. So in this case, when we were visiting the property, the interior was completely not with a lot of quality in terms of architecture, but what we really like is that the house has a lot of these small courtyards that were really narrow. And what was really beautiful is that these courtyards at the end were the possibility for these kind of elements to happen. When architecture and just a small vegetation start emerging from concrete. And what we like about that is to remember us how just a small entrance of light could change the context of a space and also show us that everything is alive, that everything is there. So parting from that, what we do, trying to obviously demolish a lot of part of this building and trying to transform it, we want to do a scheme where reintroduce into the plot this idea of the voids. So what we like about these projects is that instead of thinking about how we put solid space inside this, how the voids will shape the space that you're going to be living in. So from there we do these three huge, no, not huge because they are really small, sorry for the word, these like deep courtyards where this kind of vegetation and this kind of natural habitats could happen, and from there the houses are placed alongside these courtyards. So these are 4 houses that are placed along these courtyards, but at the end, again, what happens here is, what was important for us in this project, it's, again, as we were saying in Círculo Mexicano, it's not the way we do architecture, it's the way we relate with the natural environment, and architecture is always the mediator in this kind of negotiations. Architecture is always the way when we put our manifesto of how we are seeing things, how do we value the vegetation, that is another kind of form of life that could cohabit with the people that live in a specific house. So all the houses have this kind of relation. The courtyard is 2.1 meters long. It's a really narrow courtyard, but at the end it gives enough light, enough space, and enough enclosure to make a space habitable. And also something that happens in Mexico City is that obviously it's a really noisy city with a lot of traffic and a lot of pollution, but these kind of courtyards become a refuge, a kind of oasis where people just get in, disconnect from the city, and you could live your private life alongside all these plants that are in the courtyard. Going to forward in this kind of idea, in another commission that was also in the same neighborhood in Colonia Condesa, but in a complete different situation, there was no pre-existence here. It was just an empty plot. We were still having the same questions about how can a new building could be relating to this idea of how do we live in a neighborhood dense and really condensed like Colonia Condesa. How can we be relating with environments and with the natural outside of the city? So in this particular project, what we want to do is to generate more space in the way we relate from a project to the street. So the first decision here was, instead of having the facade at the border of the plot, we want to put the facade 3 meters behind receded from the street, and do a kind of an empty structure that if in some kind of a way we cannot do here so many courtyards in the project, what we want to do is to understand that your relation with the street could be separated or mediated by a huge void that is the deepness of the facade. So this concrete structure, what helps you to do is to create an apartment or interior space where you have this exterior void or exterior transition between the street and interior space, and also gives you a different kind of ways how the light enters, also to understand that this space could have their own vegetation, but also it's a void where you can relate to the vegetation that is already existing in the city. And something that we really like about this idea or these projects is that when you enter to the space of the apartments, you have different ways to put light inside the spaces. So again, for example, this living room has one courtyard that is in the 5th floor on the left side, but on the right side you have the facade 3 meters separated from the street. And the spaces become more related like a kind of a house rather than a normal apartment. So we really like the idea of how these kind of strategies could help us to reshape the idea of the interior space. So again, this building works in this idea of how the courtyards, the void, and the deepness of the spaces helps you with the transitions between the space. And as you can see, the plan is completely simple. It's really geometrical. It's a complete concrete grid. But at the end, what you have, it's a lot of small corners or small spaces where are related to the exterior. I don't know how I'm going on time. I don't have the clock here. But okay, we're going there. Could you click, please? Forward. Thank you. Going back to this idea of how we see nature, we like this reference because the idea of a vivarium, it's where you put some parts about nature inside like a glass box, inside a kind of a vivarium. But what we like of this idea is how we as humans could take care of other species. Not just by grabbing them and putting inside something, but also trying to be more aware and observe better what is happening in this kind of environments. So for example, here in Casa Wabi is an artist resident program that is placed in the neighborhood of, in the coast of Puerto Escondido, Oaxaca. There is this huge house that was made by Tadao Ando, and they invite different architects to do pavilions. So we were asked to do a pavilion where the commission was to do a pavilion for an endemic species that is kind of in risk of extinction, that is called the Guayacan. That is a tree that takes a lot of time to grow. So when they invite us to do this pavilion, we like to think how does this kind of projects could help us to be more aware about another species that is living among us. So the first thing that we do is to think the project rather than an architectural form, a project that is much more related with the idea of a plant. So the first thing that we do is that instead of moving the plant from the part where the plant is grown, that is the soil, the floor, let's say, what we do is to move the people that works 1 meter below. So it's a project that works like an excavation, and it has two purposes. The first one obviously was that the shape of the excavation helps us to leave the plant at the level of the soil, but also it's really different in the moment you as a worker in this kind of nursery, you work with the plants. It's very different to have the plant in the level of the floor than to have it in the level of a table, like in a kind of a plantation table. So what we create here is just a threshold to get inside the project, and from there what was important for us is to have this relation where the plant is at the level of table, where you can see towards it, see if the plant is okay, but also instead for the people that is working with the plant, it's really different just to be moving to remove a bad weed or something from each one of the bags of plantation bags from the floor. Is completely different to do it from the table. So also it takes into consideration the way the people is working in this kind of nurseries. So at the end, the project was just a reminder where the landscape is working, and we want to do in this huge slab that is a threshold, this kind of water collector that again reminds us that all these plants and we also as humans are related to the idea of water, and if water is not there present, everything will not be there. All the Guayacans will die, all the plants will die. So we want to do that huge like roof water mirror, like a reminder that water is the beginning of everything. So at the end, the project was this huge slab with the water on top, a water deposit to irrigate the plants, and that was it. And in the same way that we see this kind of context and these kind of relations where we become more aware and more concerned about how can we design not just for people or for tourists or visitors or for the photograph to be on the magazine, how can we put our work at the service of a specific endemic plant like in the Guayacan, and also for the workers that are doing this kind of work in these small nurseries. I'm going to jump here to a complete different context. That is a town in the north of the country. This place is called Nacosari de Garcia. It's maybe like 1 hour close to the border with Nogales. And what we think about this kind of context is that these are towns that were made just because the extraction of different kind of mines. So all the north of the country in the state of Sonora is basically a mining state, and these towns were built towards with the mine. So we were invited there to do specific projects that were how to improve the urban space, because they are not completely beautiful towns, they are kind of awkward towns. How to improve the quality of the urban space, and also how to add community projects or community spaces that help the people there to have a different, a better quality on the city. So Something that is quite important here is that the town that is the one that is on the great mark over there, it's not working. You can see all the red elements are places where there has been extraction, and the huge red marks on the right hand is the size of the mining sites alongside the community. So you understand that the cities, in comparison of the places that are being modified in terms of extraction, is huge. So the first thing that we want to do, a lot of years from now, this is in 2014, 12 years ago, something that we want to create in these spaces is just do small, simple architectural interventions that bring quality to the urban space. We see that in the town there was some practices, old practices where the stone was a kind of a good element in architecture that has been lost over the years. So we want to recreate the idea of stone like an element of memory, and we also want to bring the steelwork to the place and reintroduce vegetation that people doesn't like anymore, because they say that, for example, these trees that are the palo verdes, they see them everywhere, so they don't want to put them on their cities, but in some other way, these trees are the ones that are more resilient to these kind of environments. So we want to reintroduce that, and from there do these kind of practices of just how to order space. So this was the first project that we did with a mining company a lot of years ago. Again, it was just how to relate with elements like nature, a tree, how did you irrigate them, and use that as a topic just to order the space. And from there, a few years after we finished this project, they invite us to work in this other town that is also a mining site. It's called Cananea. This is one of the largest mining sites in the planet. And again, the city is really small compared with all the amount of territory that is transformed. And here, what they invite us to do, they were already doing some different complex projects for the community. There was a hotel, a hospital, an office building, cinemas, a supermarket, a community center, sports center. When they call us, it was just these dirt places beside the buildings. They were already being finished. So what we do when they invite us is, instead of working on the buildings, what we want to do is how to weave all these elements, not just with the idea of architecture linking these projects, but also how can we, with nature and with natural elements, start create all this space of weaving not just the projects between one another, but also the project with the territory. So we do a huge reservoir with all the residual water from the projects, and from there we do small courtyards, pocket courtyards that start articulate vegetation, shadows, sculpture, to try to reshape the idea between the buildings. We do this dry river also to connect with the reservoir, and do these grass surfaces where people can play instead of just the dirt. That is the most normal kind of landscape in these kind of towns. So at the end for us in this project was also thinking how can nature and revaluing nature could be the thing that weave architecture with human experience in so many ways. And maybe 6 or 7 years later, they invite us back to work in this place of Nacosari de Garcia. That is where we show the plaza that I showed before. And the red mark that it's placed alongside the city, it's a tailing dam that was 100 years old from the mining company. So they invite us to work in this space because this tailing dam it's a place that has put a lot of pollution in the river of the area. So when it rains, all the water flows through the terrain and goes into the river. And also, the dust of this polluted state is a dust where nothing grows. In 100 years old, nothing has grown alongside this mountain of residue. And it's really thin kind of soil, so it flies very easily with the wind. So all the pollution, all the dust goes into the city, and the main health issue in the town is respiratory problems for the population. So what we do here is to start understanding the soil, what are the properties, and how can we reactivate this kind of old contaminated soil. So what we try to do is to reshape a little bit the landscape with some simple strategies. The first one was just to reshape the topography to conduct the water in just one single stream, the most as possible, to try to control this flowing and try to retain the pollution from the river. The second one was to create some barriers towards the city, because somehow the soil also goes into the streets of the houses. And the third one was to create a kind of a soil much more resilient to weather, to plants, and to biology, to could be able to grow things in the site. So this is a site when they invite us to participate in it. And 1 year after, we managed to start making things growing in the upper parts of these mountains of soil. But what was interesting is that at this moment we understand that the only way that we could really have something affordable to change this kind of territory is using nature as our ally. So what we want to do is to do a small growing the first season, and then it will die for sure, but that material, organic matter, will end up being on top of the sand, of the land, and the next year we'll regrow things. So the first year was this. It starts growing quite fast for our surprise. And we understand architecture working like a kind of a machine between nature. We as architects, and we like a lot of this representation of Douglas Darden of Oxygen House, because we understand that what we do normally is this kind of things, is understanding how can we put everything into relation. I don't know if we can click on this video. I don't know if we will have sound, but if not, at least we can see them. This is the site today. can go to the next, please. To start the closure of the lecture, I will want to jump to this final project that weaves also these kind of ideas that we've been presenting here about how we are concerned with ideas of nature, ideas of memory, and ideas of history. And this particular project, it was a really strange and atypic site, that it was placed completely on the side of the Ex Convento del Carmen. Ex Convento del Carmen is one of these convents that were during the colonial time in Mexico in the 1600, by the Franciscans, and they do this to promote the colonials all around the country. And these are really interesting, huge structures that were made in that time. And the site, it was completely placed alongside of this historic place. Actually, it's really strange how, in which moment of the history this become a private space, because most of these are national monuments, so people cannot own them. But somehow this site was on a sale. So originally, on the research, we understand that this place where we were working was part of the side parts of the convent, where they have a storage for grains and things that they use in their agricultural lands. And when we find the space, we find this house completely placed beside the convent, with a lot of interventions. The quality of the space was okay, but at the end we were commissioned to do the offices for a cinema production that is called La Corriente del Golfo. So what we do is to understand the different stages of the project. The one that is the white side, that is the white one that is on the lower part, it's a volume that was existent, so we understand that we have to recreate that. And all of the parts of the project were completely later than the convent, so what we want to do is to put some years back and just leave the elements that were from the 1800, and the other ones, demolish them and create something new in a lighter structure that could bend in a further time in the future could be removed. So we do a timber pavilion between the space that is the one that you see on the long side. In the next image, you can see the red one. It's everything that was pre-existent, that was originally from the convent. The other parts were demolished, and what we add is these other elements inside. So we do this timber light structure inside the space to allocate part of the elements of the offices, and with existing elements we do a complete process of restoration, remove all the coverings, we review structurally speaking all the elements to try to bring them to something more new, and also to guarantee that all the building will resist all the new regulations that we have in construction in Mexico City. You can see there the demolitions on the left and the new additions on the right. This one, the pieces that were not originally, that were demolished, and we add these light new structures on the right side of the building. And at the end, something that we really like this project is that even with the color that we do, one of the new parts all in black and the new ones all in white, the same as the convent, it's to also try to make a dialogue between times where the new things could be making a conversation with all things and letting nature and all the exterior bases flow between them, understanding that what architecture has been through times is always a mediator between these kind of realities and how we inhabit, but also how we relate with the natural conditions of the site. So from the interior spaces, basically you see the walls of the convent that are just a few meters separated from the glass. And alongside all the project, you always have these void spaces, and we want to create this volume that is not like enclosed, that like to hide somehow the limits of the glasses. For example, here on the left side of the door is a glass that you don't see because we just embed it between the concrete and the wooden door. And those kind of limits, we want to make them blur, so you don't really realize if you are inside the space or outside the space. And at the end, what you have is this relation between the old building that has been refurbished, and also the new building, and all this dialogue that is an evolution and a continuum between all these spaces. And you can see again, this facade was quite complicated, because you can imagine that the authorities that protect these kind of monuments are quite complex. It takes us something like 7 years in terms of permits just to be able to do this project, and just to they let us to have this small glass box in top of the volume was quite a battle with them, because they wanted that everything looks like they were old. So it was quite an interesting project in terms of properties. Okay, so now I'm closing. I'm going to read the conclusion of the presentation. Okay, this presentation brings together a series of projects that explore the traces and transformations between the natural and the built, between past and present, and between space and those who inhabit it. From the territorial critique present at the Venice Biennale to the recovery of deteriorated houses and the rescue of the endemic species Guayacán. Each intervention proposes a conscious architecture that assumes its role in history and its environment. I have shared processes of conservation and transformations of historic buildings in Mexico City, where memory interwaves with the possibility of new futures. In each case, architecture acts as a mediator. It does not only build, it engages in dialogue, narrates, and cares. This presentation proposes an architecture with vitality, one capable of influencing and being influenced by its context, in a symbiotic relationship with the environment and its inhabitants. An architecture that transforms itself into a material and ecological act, and from that position articulates a collective commitment to the restoration of the planet. This image, captured recently by the Orion spacecraft, shows us Earth from the moon once more. What has changed is us. We have spent decades building, extracting, and intervening on the fragile surface visible in the distance. The crescent of Earth's setting over the barren lunar landscape is not only a photograph, it is a mirror. Materia viva is our answer to what it reflects, the belief that every material we touch, every wall we rise, every courtyard we open to the sky carries a responsibility toward that small, luminous world. Architecture at its best is an act of care for the planet, visible, vulnerable, and completely alive. Thank you very much.